This brings us to the second tactic often used by people who want to convince themselves and others to buck the scientific consensus. It's difficult to convince many people to go against 97 to 98% of the experts, so it makes sense to try to show that the consensus is so obviously wrong that we don't need any experts to tell us what to think.
If you're the police, where are your badges?
Badges? We ain't got no badges. We don't need no badges. I don't have to show you any stinking badges.
One person who arguably uses this tactic to the greatest effect is Lord Christopher Monckton, who has multiple times been invited by members of the U.S. Congress to testify before their committees.
I especially want to thank Lord Monckton for testifying. He is generally acknowledged as one of the most knowledgeable, if not the most knowledgeable, experts from a skeptical point of view on this issue of climate change.
And he has really been the chief, main focal point. If you had to say there was a general out there fighting the eugenicist, fighting the control freaks that want to set up a carbon tyranny, it's Lord Christopher Monckton.
Lord Monckton is a journalist, politician, puzzle inventor, and hereditary peer in the United Kingdom. Hereditary peers are just people who have inherited titles from their ancestors. In this case, Lord Monckton is the 3rd Viscount Monckton of Brenchley. He used to be a policy advisor to Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, and now is the chief policy advisor to the Science and Public Policy Institute, a clearinghouse for literature skeptical of human-induced climate change. Finally, he is the deputy leader of the UK Independence Party, a small political party in the United Kingdom that wants independence from the European Union. Lord Monckton has no formal scientific training, so how did someone like that rise through the ranks to become the foremost spokesman for those skeptical of mainstream climate science? First, although Lord Monckton never claims to be a scientist, he does tend to pad his resume a bit. For example, he has repeatedly presented himself to members of the U.S. Congress as a member of the British Parliament. In a 2006 letter to Senators Olympia Snowe and John Rockefeller, Lord Monckton referred to himself as a member of the upper house of the United Kingdom Legislature, which is the House of Lords. When he testified before Congress in 2009, he brought greetings from the British Parliament, again implying that he is a member.
Sir, I bring fraternal greetings from the Mother of Parliaments to the great Congress of your athletic democracy, and I pray that God's blessing may rest upon your councils.
When queried, however, the House of Lords Information Office responded that Christopher Monckton is not and has never been a member of the House of Lords. As strange as that is, it can't top Lord Monckton's claim to have invented a cure for Graves' disease, multiple sclerosis, herpes, influenza, and possibly even HIV. He created a company called Resurrexy Pharmaceutical to market his treatment. In fact, he has even filed 4 patent applications for his treatments over the past couple years. All of the applications have now been terminated by the British Intellectual Property Office. The point of Monckton's outlandish claims seems to be to convince his audience to accept him as some kind of brilliant, important person. Then he can flatter the audience members by implying that they are just as smart. In fact, audience members can check out everything he says for themselves.
Do not believe a word I say. Now, not many lecturers say that, but I say that because science is not a belief system. It is a process of rigorous inquiry. And if you don't like what I say about it, you can go and check the data and the literature to see whether I have chosen fairly and represented it fairly in what I say to you today. I do not require belief.
But the fact is that Monckton's audience members usually don't bother to check for themselves, because of the way he presents the issue, it all seems so obvious.
A horse goes into a bar, and the barman says, "Why the long face?" Because it's a horse, you idiot. Most of the points I'm going to be making to you today will be as blindingly obvious as that, because one of the curious features of this debate, which you will have noticed yourselves, is that the forces of darkness, I call them the bedwetters for convenience, have managed to make the absurd seem obvious and the obvious seem absurd. And so we are going to turn that back and make the obvious obvious once again.
It turns out, however, that when scientists have taken the trouble to check on Lord Monkton's claims, they have inevitably come to the conclusion that he has badly misrepresented the facts. Consider the following example where Lord Monckton told members of Congress that carbon dioxide is building up in the atmosphere more slowly than the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has predicted.
Carbon dioxide is accumulating in the air at less than half the rate that the United Nations had imagined.
Here is the graph Monckton showed of atmospheric carbon dioxide buildup from 2002 to 2009. The dark blue line represents the actual carbon dioxide concentration. The medium blue line represents a linear fit of the data, and the light blue field represents what Monckton says was the IPCC's prediction. Here is another graph he often shows with the first one. The only difference is that here he has plotted the IPCC prediction for the entire 21st century. Several scientists have examined this graph and have informed Lord Monckton that the IPCC prediction band is plotted incorrectly. In response to this criticism, Monckton has indicated that he got his data from this IPCC graph. Did he really? Let's match up the axes of both graphs, superimpose them, and see what we get. It's easy to see that Monckton's version is not the same as the IPCC graph he says he got his data from. Out at the year 2100, his light blue band is broader than the one in the IPCC figure, but this isn't such a big concern because Monckton's values actually match those in another IPCC figure that includes more data. The most troubling part is in the earlier part of the graph where the IPCC projection band clearly swings down lower than Monckton's. This is exactly where he compares the real data to his version of the IPCC prediction, and the fact is that the real data is right on top of the real IPCC projections. So even though Lord Monckton makes it seem obvious that the IPCC was wrong, he was only able to do so by plotting false data that he blamed on the IPCC. The story doesn't end here, though. Lord Monckton also told members of Congress that the IPCC's temperature predictions also overestimated the actual temperature evolution during the first decade of the 21st century.
There has been global cooling, as you see on that slide, for 7 years.
Here is the slide Lord Monckton showed. The dark red line is the monthly global average temperature from January 2002 through January 2009. The light red line is just a linear fit to the data to show the overall trend. The pink region is supposed to represent the IPCC's temperature predictions, which Lord Monckton claims came from the A2 emissions scenario. Once again, it appears obvious that the IPCC got it wrong. But when we look deeper, it soon becomes apparent that Lord Monckton hasn't honestly presented the data. Here is a graph of the IPCC climate model predictions for the A2 emissions scenario, taken directly from the 2007 IPCC report. The colored lines represent the output of individual model runs, and the black line represents an average. All of the model runs have been subjected to a 3-year running average to smooth out big spikes in the data. Now let's blow that up to see the current decade, match up the axes, and superimpose Lord Monckton's graph on the IPCC graph. There are several things you should notice here. First, Monckton's version of the IPCC temperature predictions doesn't seem to have much to do with what the IPCC actually says they predicted. Second, Monckton plotted monthly average temperatures rather than 3-year averages, so his temperature data is a lot more spiky than the temperature curves for the climate model runs. But even so, the temperature mostly stays within the range of the model projections. If we were to transform Monckton's data with a 3-year average, it would all fit in the projected range. Finally, look at the colored lines representing the individual climate model runs. These models predict that, although the temperature will generally go up, there will be periods of several years where the temperature might go down. That's why climatologists don't generally talk about temperature trends over short periods of time like Monckton's 7 years. The trend over such a short period could randomly go up or down, and either way, it doesn't have much to do with the long-term trend. So once again, we have caught Monckton fabricating graph data to discredit the IPCC. There's no question about it. He says the IPCC predicted one thing, and when we look it up, we find out that the IPCC said no such thing. How can he justify this? Here's what he said in response to scientists who had criticized his fabricated temperature graphs. Some have said that the IPCC projection zone on our graphs should show exactly the values that the IPCC actually projects for the A2 scenario. However, as will soon become apparent, the IPCC's global warming projections for the early part of the present century appear to have been, in effect, artificially detuned to conform more closely to observation. In other words, he thinks the IPCC monkeyed with its models, so he used his own special method to calculate the answers they should have gotten. I don't have time to show it here, but his method for calculating the projections is flatly wrong. And in any case, it should be obvious to any honest person that if you claim to graph what someone else projected, you ought to plot what they actually projected. So where do we go from here? Whom should you trust when you're trying to decide what to believe about climate change? The bottom line is that if you choose to reject the overwhelming consensus of active climate scientists, you may just find yourself following some collection of veterinarians and lab techs, or worse, a guy who goes around pretending to be a member of parliament, claims to have invented a miracle cure for several serious diseases, and routinely makes up data to discredit the climate science community. The choice is yours.